They say true wisdom makes less noise, but there's something deeper happening when spiritual masters disappear into silence. It's not detachment, it's not withdrawal, it's transformation. Before enlightenment, the outer world begins to dissolve, not physically but mentally. Words become heavy, thoughts slow down, and what remains is stillness. He was once a teacher known for his clarity. People would gather just to hear him speak, but then slowly his words faded, not because he had nothing left to say, but because what he discovered could no longer be spoken. He sat in silence, not out of mystery, but necessity. In ancient traditions, this phase was known, a point in the path where the seeker turns inward completely, where even sacred texts and mantras fall away. Silence isn't emptiness, it's a bridge between who you think you are and what you really are. And in that bridge, true awakening begins. He wasn't always silent. In the early years, his presence filled the room. Every word he spoke felt like it carried weight, precision, fire. But as time passed, something shifted. His answers became shorter, his pauses grew longer, until one day someone asked him a question, and he simply smiled. That moment stayed with us more than any lecture. He didn't disappear physically. He still walked the same halls, sat under the same tree. But it felt like he was moving through a different world, one made of space, not noise. One of his students once whispered, "It's like he's listening to something we can't hear." And maybe he was. Because in that silence you could feel something else rising. Clarity, presence, stillness so thick it changed the air. He wasn't withdrawing. He was dissolving. And watching him, we began to see. Silence isn't what happens when there's nothing to say. It's what happens when everything becomes understood. Across ancient traditions, silence has never meant absence. In Zen, the master answers with a stare, a breath, a tap of a stick. In Sufism, the dervish dances into stillness. In Taoism, silence is the sound of the way. Each path, each sacred lineage, teaches one truth. When the mind stops echoing, the soul begins to speak. But silence isn't forced. It arrives when nothing else makes sense, when every word feels like it's carving distance between you and the real. That's why true masters don't perform their enlightenment. They retreat, not to hide, but to become clear. There is a depth to stillness that frightens the ego. It can't be owned. It can't be taught. It must be entered. And in that space, something strange happens. You don't lose yourself. You lose the illusion of self. So the great ones stop teaching not because they've run out of truths, but because truth, in its purest form, no longer fits inside words. If something in this silence touched you, subscribe and let the journey deepen. In today's spiritual scene, silence is often misunderstood. It's mistaken for passivity, weakness, or worse, irrelevance. The louder the message, the more awake it seems. Words become brands. Enlightenment becomes a performance. But true silence doesn't market itself. It doesn't need a platform. It's invisible. And that terrifies the ego. Because silence doesn't praise your identity. It dissolves it. It doesn't affirm your beliefs. It questions them. And that's dangerous to a self that's built on validation. So instead, we fill the void with noise. We turn spirituality into content, teachings into trends. But the masters knew, what is sacred is not loud. What is real is not always shareable. They walked away not because they lacked answers, but because the answers had outgrown language. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll feel it too. That beneath the search, the rituals, the endless questions, there's a quiet truth, waiting, not to be spoken, but to be lived. Silence is not a stopping point, it's a doorway. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of resistance. When a master falls into silence, it's not retreat, it's transcendence. Something begins to shift beneath the surface. The mind loosens, identity unhooks. What's left isn't emptiness, it's clarity without commentary. There's a reason sacred texts speak in paradox. You are not the self. Do nothing, and everything is done. These aren't riddles. They're invitations to cross the threshold where logic fails and presence begins. That's why true silence unnerves us. It doesn't offer answers. It offers exposure. No distraction, no performance, just you, bare, listening to a silence that listens back. And then, in the middle of that vast quiet, something awakens. Not a voice, not an insight, but a remembering. A sense that you were never becoming anything. You were simply peeling away what was never you. That is the silence before enlightenment. Not still like sleep, still like truth. Then, one day, he was gone. No announcement, no farewell. Just absence. Quiet, complete. Some thought he had died. Others said he had simply walked away. But those who truly listened, they knew. He hadn't left. He had become the silence itself. Not a metaphor, a transformation. Because what is a true master, if not a mirror? And when the mirror dissolves, all that remains is your own reflection, clear, unfiltered. We searched for his voice, his presence, his teachings, but all we found was space, and in that space, something strange happened. We began to hear differently, not outside, but within, not with ears, but with attention. It was never about his answers. It was about the space his silence left behind, the place where our own wisdom could surface. That was his final teaching. He didn't want followers. He wanted rememberers, not of doctrine, but of self. The silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was alive. It didn't ask for devotion. It asked for presence. Not to follow his path, but to walk our own, without noise. And that's where the real path begins. Not in books, not in ceremonies, but in the simple, terrifying stillness of your own breath. Because silence doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing without the self. It means letting go of needing to be seen, understood, approved. And in that letting go, a new voice arises, not louder but deeper, one that doesn't shout, "I am awakened," but simply watches, gently, without judgment. That's the voice we're afraid to meet, because it asks nothing, yet shows everything. And maybe that's why true masters vanish, not to escape the world, but to leave us alone with the only teacher that never lies, silence. So what if silence isn't the absence of meaning, but the moment all meaning becomes clear? What if the masters never disappeared? They just stopped performing. They stopped feeding the mind, and started listening to what was always whispering beneath the noise. You see, the greatest truths are not shouted. They're not even spoken. They're lived, quietly, completely, within. Silence is not the end of the road, it's the return to the beginning. To the you before identity, before belief, before becoming. That's why they vanish. Because once you've touched what's real, words feel like echoes of something already known. You don't need to convince, you don't need to explain. You just are. And maybe the greatest act of awakening isn't speaking more truth, but needing to speak less of it. What if true enlightenment begins when there's nothing left to say?